Good afternoon. I'm Cindy Hubbard, and I have the great pleasure of introducing this session on behalf of the League of American Orchestras. I would like to thank Music Publishers Association of the United States for helping to make this meeting possible. Founded in 1895, the MPA is the oldest music trade organization in the United States, fostering communication among publishers, dealers, music educators, and all ultimate users of music. And I especially want to thank MPA board member Norman Ryan, who is here with us today for this session. And so I get to also introduce this wonderful panel up here. Norman is on the end with Schott Music Corporation and European American. Stephen Stucky, composer. Joana Carneiro, who's now music director of the Berkeley Symphony Orchestra in my backyard. Chad Smith, is a competitor in the south of California, the Los Angeles Philharmonic. And Ed Harsh, who's with Meet, the composer. Enjoy.
Thanks very much, Cindy. I'm not sure, are these working? Can you? Yeah, there we go. Thanks. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. We've got limited time, so we're going to dig right in. What we thought when we were putting this panel together with the League was that it would be most interesting to sort of dig into the nuts and bolts of what we've heard this morning with the Atlanta School and yesterday with the sessions that also Robert Spano was involved with, and just really talk about what is relevant in your communities. How are we across all constituent groups able to partner with you to really help you, come up with the creative, imaginative solutions for, tapping into the value that composers can bring to your orchestras. So, first of all, on your table is a complete sort of summary of the new works listening, the excerpts on the new works listening booth, and I wanted to thank the MPA for supporting that for the first time ever at both Opera America and the League this year. So great thank you to them for making that happen. If you haven't checked out the listening booth, please do. It's in the exhibit hall. So I just wanted to throw out a few thoughts that I've sort of garnered in last sessions, and to sort of recap a bit and to get you all and the panel thinking about this idea of partnerships with composers. So number one, what I heard earlier, orchestras seldom remembered for the standard repertoire they've performed, but instead more likely for the new works that they've introduced. And audiences in Atlanta, and I would wager Los Angeles, and many other orchestras, are coming to concerts more frequently in search of something new. They're looking for the good in what they will hear instead of spying the program for the new work and calculating when they'll flee to the bar, or worse, leave the concert. And finally, I wanted to read to you a paragraph from the Opera America, our sister organization's strategic plan, and all I did in this paragraph was substitute the word orchestra for opera and performances for production. So here we go. The creation and production of new work continues to be essential to the vitality of the art. Some new works may expand the definition of the orchestra and benefit from performances in alternative venues. Subsequent performances of works that have already premiered, innovative producing partnerships, extended rehearsals, and improved training for administrators, composers, conductors, and musicians are among the strategies that should be used to increase the frequency and quality of the North American, instead of opera, orchestral repertoire. So I'd like to start with Pulitzer Prize-winning composer Stephen Stucky to my left. And I'd like all of the panel to just give us a brief summary of what qualities, in your view, contribute to the most successful relationship between a composer and an orchestra. Steve.
Well, am I on now? Hello? Yeah. Thanks, Norman. I'm happy to do it, but at first I have to insert the obligatory reference to Ernest Fleischmann, because I haven't had my turn yet, and because Peter was very moving this morning at breakfast. I'm not sure everybody will remember that Ernest Fleischmann was one of the inventors of the composer residency in this country. Several years before Meet the Composer set up the nationally funded program in the early 1980s, he appointed Paul Chihara to be resident composer of the LA Phil which probably came as an enormous surprise to Zubin Mehta, who was undoubtedly not consulted. And then Ernest plucked Bill Kraft from behind the timpani and made him resident composer, and they fought like old lovers for 30 years, very productively. And then he brought John Harbison, with whom he fought so badly that John left right away. And then he brought me, and I somehow survived, and it made a huge difference in my life. With a weak music director, such as Andre Previn, Ernest personally put the complete prestige of the organization behind the idea that new music was at the center of what we do. With a strong music director like Esa-Pekka Salonen, of course, he didn't have to do that. Mm-hmm. Esa-Pekka stepped in and fulfilled that. But it got me thinking, actually, not about the new models, but about those old original models from, believe it or not, 30 years ago now. The good old days of the composer residencies, John Adams in San Francisco, Jacob Druckmann in New York, and so on. There have been many models since. We've heard about some of them, and we need actually as much flexibility as possible. But I want to go back to those pioneering residencies to learn what seemed to me two lessons. Some of them were successes and some weren't. And I think two factors, in my view, were the most important. The first is longevity, just sticking with it. I have a strong bias in favor of long-term relationships, like the ones that Atlanta is pursuing now. It takes a long time. It takes a great deal of personal investment for a composer to become a familiar face, a household name, a trusted colleague, a friend. And I don't mean only to the public, I mean to the members of the orchestra and to the administration. In the case of Los Angeles, that wasn't just 21 years with, with me, but it's also more than 25 years relationship with John Adams, permanent member of the family. Now a long relationship with Tom Adash, a long relationship with Oliver Nussin, and so on. So the strategy not of playing one piece by every composer in the world, but of establishing a few relationships that become dependable and that the audience learns to depend on and to look forward to. So you're not just branding, you're actually making real partnerships, practically live partnerships. One of my greatest satisfactions in LA was being there long enough to really know the public and really know the orchestra and for them really to know me. That way you trust each other. So once you've earned that trust, the second point I think for me is how do you spend it? How do you spend that capital? And I think a number of residencies have failed when composers use the position to further just their own music or just a narrow stylistic slice of music by their friends. I won't name names, but we can all remember some of these occasions. And I think that's bound to fail. Instead, I think when you've earned that confidence I was talking about, you have to spend it with the broadest possible range of musical sympathies, the most generous agenda you can muster. So you can look at your friends, the audience, and say, friends, I believe in this, try it. Friends, I believe in this music, try it. I believe in that music, way over there, not a narrow slice, try it. And they trust us enough to do it. That is still, I think, the most rewarding part of my experience in Los Angeles, and for me, an essential part of what makes a successful residency. I just want to add that although I have a bias in favor of longevity, I did a number of short residencies this year, and they worked very well also. I just want to tell you quickly why I think they did. At the Winnipeg Symphony, I think it's working so beautifully because they've been doing it for 20 years and they have a visible commitment. Because they have a resident composer, Vincent Ho, whom the public loves and identifies with. They had me working not only with the Winnipeg Symphony, but also with a local civic wind band and two student organizations. And they have a wholehearted visibility of Alexander Micklethwaite as the face of this operation. So everybody believes it. At the Eugene Symphony, I was again there for just a few days, but it was a success, I think, for a similar reason. I worked not only with the Eugene Symphony, but also with the Eugene Youth Orchestra and with the University of Oregon Wind Ensemble. That's not unusual. Those kinds of combinations happen now all the time. But what was key, I think, was that They brought all three ensembles, all three projects together on the same night so that they reinforced each other, so that the constituencies mingled, so that everybody felt invested and proud that night and can't wait to do it again.
Thanks, Steve. Joanna?
Good morning, everyone. Hi, Norman. From the conducting perspective, I really feel the same things as Steve, and as you know, I've been a music director for a year, so I will talk about my experience thus far. Also, before that, I was blessed to be assistant conductor at Los Angeles Philharmonic, so I take much inspiration from that wonderful institution, and a lot of the ideas come from these two mentors that are sitting with me here. When I arrived to Berkeley, I immediately understood that I did not know the community. I was born and raised in Portugal, and even though I've been living in California for a little while, I knew that it wasn't enough. And also, I was not going to spend a lot of time in Berkeley, 8 weeks, 10 weeks at the most each season. So the first thing I did, one of the first things, was to invite a composer, Gabriela Lina Frank, to be the creative advisor of the orchestra. And this has been a wonderful partnership with the composer, and one that I didn't think would happen so quickly. And this was particularly successful so far, not only because she's a wonderful artist with great knowledge of what composing means, but she is from Berkeley. She knows the community that I don't know, and she has taught me what Berkeley is musically, who is in Berkeley that I should meet musically and outside of music. And because a lot of the new music we do, we integrate in community outreach. It has been a wonderful partnership that has been growing, and I think will grow into wonderful things in upcoming years. So that's the first thing in terms of relationships with composers that being a music director has taught me. Having a creative partner in my thinking, in my programming, not only for the orchestra but for the community at large, has been a wonderful experience. Then building a relationship with the composers, the young composers of the community, has been another wonderful success of the orchestra that I did not start. Kent Nagano has had a great hand with this orchestra, and I have to say that going to Berkeley, and you were talking about how it is important for people to feel passionate about new music, and coming into such an environment is really a blessing for a conductor because things are expected, I think, that in other places wouldn't. New is expected, as you said, in each concert, and because it's an orchestra that doesn't do a lot of concerts a year, every concert is special and should be special also from the new music perspective. So I'm very, very lucky to come into this environment that expects new things and new music and to be always surprised at each concert. Anyway, under construction is this wonderful program only for Bay Area composers that has been going on for many years, and Gabriela has helped us to reshape it, and that's a wonderful long-term way to also invest in relationships with composers, because we aim to play in our subscription series one day one of the pieces that we are commissioning to these young composers. And then the third thing that we have implemented and has turned into a wonderful thing are the residencies with the composers. Invariably, we have new music in our concerts and 21st century music, and we always ask, with very, very few exceptions, we have done this, for the composers to be there all week long. And this has been a very successful experience, not only for the orchestra, for myself, of course, because we all, as conductors, as artists, wish that we could always speak to the composers, to the real creators, so that it's all clear in terms of what we should be playing. But for the orchestra, it has been a tremendous experience in the music-making process to have the composer around. Steve was there this year, for example, and the orchestra just loves having the composer around in all rehearsals. also the pre-concert lectures, having the composer around. And I'm talking about the pre-concert lectures because this year we had two experiences, one good, one bad, with two pieces. And in the pre-concert lecture, one of the pieces was overlooked. We didn't really explain what it was about, and I thought it was a fantastic piece. And the audience did not react very well. And we actually interviewed some of them. And we interviewed the same group of people on the next concert. And the whole pre-concert lecture was a 20-minute explanation on the piece with the musicians on stage playing excerpts from the piece. And it was a huge success. And they want to hear more about this composer. And I think both pieces were equally wonderful. So this realization that the audience is interested in the process of composition has been a wonderful learning experience. Gabriela has been talking to, for example, Gabriela has been talking to our board many times about the process of composing a piece. And more, as we start commissioning pieces, we will ask the composers to come as soon as they can so that they can speak to our audience about that process of composing. So I would say these three things are the most important ones that I can remember right now.
Terrific. Thanks, Joanna. Chad, what qualities, in your view, contribute to the most successful relationship between a composer and an orchestra in your experience?
I feel like, at least at this very beginning part of this discussion, you're going to hear a lot of the same things coming from us because three of us on this panel come from a place that has really kind of banked its future as the center for new music. We want to believe that Los Angeles, and specifically the Los Angeles Philharmonic, will be and has been the center for new music in our industry. And what that means is I think that there are kind of several key things that we kind of, key assumptions that we have. One is that we approach this with conviction. Ernest, when Steve said that Ernest was we're going to do new music and it's who we are, we've been doing that for about 30 years. And so over the course of these 30 years, we have been able to put to bed certain of these discussions that you consistently have. It's not a question of if we're going to do new music or when there is a challenging sales program, are we going to cut or change. That no longer happens at the LA Philharmonic. For us, it is how do we best support it, because this is who we are. So one is there's conviction and there's the long-term prospect of this. For me, one of the things that was most successful, and I came into this process. I've been with the Philharmonic for about 8 years. So my take on it when I arrived was that in Steve and in a great resident composer, Steve was called consulting composer for new music. We had someone who had a real core identity. We could have very frank conversations about what we thought was good and what we thought was not good. But we also had a partner who realized the importance of a major institution, that we had to also kind of be Catholic as well, that there would be pieces that we could recognize might perhaps fall outside of our traditional comfort zone that we still need to present. So it was about creating this proper mix. As I said, it was important for the institution to develop through new music a core identity. What I like to joke around with my artistic administrator colleagues is, we'll sometimes send each other programs for next season and take away conductors and take away who is actually sending it, and you just look at it and you say, that looks like Michael Tilson Thomas's season. That looks like an Esa-Pekka Salonen season. That looks like, and for me, that's really important. As an arts institution, we have to have an identity, and so much of our identity is about kind of the new music that we play. The other thing that Steve was very instrumental in with us, and something that we believe very passionately about, is that new music has to be completely integrated. It isn't about putting new music here or putting it there. It is a part of our institution, meaning we commission about 10 to 12 pieces a year. We also bring back regularly the commissions from previous seasons that we really believe in, and we're constantly revisiting the classics of the recent decades. And we build that into our subscription programs. We build that into, obviously, our new music series, which is our Ivory Tower programming series. We build it into our chamber music series with our orchestras. We build it into our educational programs. So our subscription education programs prominently feature contemporary works, at least one of the 4 each year. And we have now started commissioning pieces for recitals. When we have big artists who come and give a recital, we want them to do new works. We want them to be relevant. We want them to be a contemporary artist. The same thing with visiting orchestras. So it is this complete and total dedication to new work that we want represented across the multiplicity of programming avenues that we have at the Philharmonic. And in fact, with Steve, he asked us to start, as we went through a strategic planning process with our education program, he asked us to start a Young Composers Fellowship program for high school-aged kids to come to the Philharmonic on Saturdays, every Saturday, and they get lessons from Steve, from Tom Addis, from Esa-Pekka Salonen, from Kaya Sariaho, we've now gone through our first class, we call them our first batch, and they're now kind of at leading composition schools, and they're writing back and saying, you know, what do you do after you've spent 2 years working with your resident orchestras, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and you've been composing for these musicians? It's really, what do you do next? And that was something that was very important. And then finally, the final thing that we think makes a difference is this acceptance of risk. And that is an institutional value, but we have to believe that an artist and a composer is going to take the latitude to create the best possible work for us. And there are ways that we can help that along, and again, that has to do with taking a long-term approach and kind of really taking a developmental role in certain composers' lives. But it also is an acceptance within our institution and with our audiences that if 1 or 2 of our 10 or 12 pieces turns out to be a great piece, then we have a really good track record. And that's something that is about communication. We have to make sure that our audiences understand that our staff understands that the leadership, the board leadership understands that, because we don't want to have to go back and question those assumptions. I can certainly talk about how we got here, but we'll save that for another question.
Ed, how about you?
Well, the great thing about going last is that, there's a good thing and a bad thing. The bad thing is that everybody's already said all the cool stuff that needs to be said.
That's what
but the good part of it is that I can actually underline a few things that each of my colleagues has said and just, kind of say yay to each one. As Steve mentioned about the long-term commitment and the level of trust that a composer, artist can develop with the community if the orchestra gives them a chance. And again, we have Atlanta as a great example in the current world. We had lots of examples in the 80s when Meet the Composer, my organization, had these major multi-year residencies with big orchestras. Yes, absolutely, that's a great thing. Resource-wise, it's harder and harder to do, but we can all find different ways of approaching that same kind of depth and commitment. What Joanna said about the process, the commissioning process, the creation process, as being a powerful thing, we so believe that, and actually that's been borne out many times in my interaction with commissioners, with individuals who actually pay for new works, is that one of the things that's the coolest thing for them is to actually see how this thing unfolds, that there was nothing and now there is something, and that's a really powerful thing, and people can connect with that on just a kind of human creativity level. It's a way in almost no matter what the music actually sounds like. And Chad's point about conviction and institutional identity being grown out of that conviction that what one is doing is important and new music is a core part of what you do. Obviously from Meet the Composer's perspective, we would love that to be a perspective that all orchestras have. Not all orchestras, in fact, most orchestras can't do that, kind of embody that conviction in the same way, at the same level that the Los Angeles Philharmonic can. But I'm convinced, especially having experienced a lot of work with small orchestras through Ford Made in America, which is a program the League and we have done, it's not a size thing. Anybody can have that conviction. It may look different, but it's important to realize it's possible. So now, finally, to answer Norman's question, just in my negative 3 minutes left that I have, the qualities of, I'm going to interpret the question, the qualities of kind of indicators for a good relationship between orchestra and composer, depending on whether that's for a week or 2 years or whatever. Our Music Alive program, which has funded residencies ranging from 3 weeks up to several years, none of this, not kind of immersion in the way of actually living in the location that some of the 1980s residencies did, but some of them are somewhat long-term. But we've done several dozen of those the last couple of years, and based upon what we've seen in those, I can say there's kind of three things, and they're kind of obvious, but I'll go ahead and say them. The first, and this is in no particular order, but the first does seem maybe the most important, is that you have to have organizational commitment to the idea of new music and to the composer specifically, and that's really got to come from the top. Steve mentioned the notion of the weak music director. If you've got a weak music director and a killer staff and a great executive, it can happen, but at the end of the day, you want somebody who's conducting the orchestra who really cares and really, you can see the difference so quickly. The second thing is, from the composer's perspective, the composer actually has to have a commitment to being a citizen. Composers, being one myself, I know, we guarantee we're going to have commitment to our own music. And if we don't, what the hell are we doing? But there's more than that you need in kind of developing a good, useful relationship with the orchestra. You have to be willing to actually be representing your whole craft. Everybody else is a composer. You are on stage for them too. And that's really important, actually. And these two things come together with the third point, which is that in any relationship, it's really important, this is so obvious, that you have to have a good match. You can have a great composer with a great commitment to being a citizen and a fine music director who actually cares about new music, and that doesn't mean that the relationship is going to be great or productive for the institution of the orchestra. And I'm thinking now specifically in terms of residencies. The real key, I think, in terms of successful residencies through our program has been that match where the orchestra actually is trying to achieve something by having this composer there, and the composer also is getting something out of this and bringing their own skills in a way that both sides get something out of it, and guess what? The audience, community, et cetera, is part of that equation too. And now in my negative 6 minutes I have left, I'll give you one example. It'll take about 20 seconds, which is a music alive residency that we funded, the New Mexico Symphony with Miguel de Aguila. It was a couple of years ago, and New Mexico Symphony wanted to, develop its relationship with its Latino population in Albuquerque, and so that Miguel came in, and Miguel wrote a big piece that was actually a sort of a quasi-opera, kind of concert opera, that was based upon a neighborhood in Albuquerque. And he actually went and lived there for a while. And he talked to the people, and they workshopped stuff there. It was a great thing for Miguel because he got to write a big piece that he wanted to write. It was fabulous for the orchestra because, of course, at the concerts, the people from the neighborhood came because they wanted to see their story. And I think that's a great example. Not every residency has to look like that, but it's a great example of orchestra with a purpose, composer with an idea, and they come together in a beautiful way.
Great, thank you, Ed.
Yield back the last
yes, thank you all. Okay, so when we were putting this all together, we didn't want it to just be talking to you. The whole idea of this is to really engage you in this dialogue, find out what's working for you in your orchestras, what we as publishers can do to help you and partner with you to make these relationships with composers effective and more valuable for your communities and your orchestras. And I want to first acknowledge all the publishers in the room who contributed to this session. And if you just sort of wave your hand so everybody can see you when I call your name, please do that. My colleague James Albright is here from Schott Music, European American. Boozy and Hawks, we have Trudy Chan and David Schatzko here. Hello. From Carl Fisher, we have Stacy Frierson. Pure Music Classical, Todd Vunderink. Theater Presser, Judith Illica. From G. Shermer and Associated Music Publishers, we have Katie Tucker and Ed Matthew. And from Subito Music, Suzanne Ford. So just so you can continue the dialogue with all of us afterwards, you know who they are and you can ask all those probing questions. But I wanted to throw a few questions out to you before we get going, just to think even more about this topic and dig it a little deeper. First of all, number one, looking at some of the models we've had dating back to the 80s, composer residencies that Steve talked about, what has made them work for your orchestras? What's made them meaningful, sustainable, or what's, importantly, not working for you? What can we do to adapt that model And how are we reinventing that model? Obviously, performing arts organizations of all kinds are facing tough times. How do we look at discovery as opposed to just recovery in these times? And how do we make the most of engaging creators, which Joanna was talking about so eloquently? How do we engage the creators with the orchestras and the audiences as part of this process of discovery? Concurrently, how do we honor the ritual, quote unquote? And by this I'm referring more to the sense of tradition or predictability in a concert while really injecting innovation and spontaneity, which is so important in our programs. And how can we partner with other arts organizations in cities, communities, and contribute to the success of our new programming initiatives? Finally, I'd just make a comment that large, medium, or small doesn't matter. We've heard that from the panel. We've heard that from Joanna and from Chad. You know, composers often can reach new audiences in the smaller communities, and don't overlook looking locally. Diane Wittry and I were just chatting about this. Look locally in your communities. You're going to find amazing talent. And they're right there. They're connecting with your audiences. The audiences probably already know them or are aware of their music. And there are creative initiatives you can initiate around those composers who are local. So with that, I've spoken enough. We've spoken enough. I'd just like to open it up to you and hear from you about what's working and what's not.
We have microphones.
Microphones are, yeah, on both sides.
Hello, my name is Song Graham. I'm with Civic Symphony of Green Bay, and I've been there for 5 years. And I try to. It's a community orchestra. Of course, it's a very small budget orchestra. We have about 53,000, which is very, very small, and probably a lot of you can't even imagine how we run the business. But I'm trying to incorporate with some new works as well as the traditional one. But my obstacle at this stage is sometimes I can't do works that I love to do because of the affordability. I've done Rainbow Body twice because it was not only a wonderful piece, but also because it was affordable for us. Mm-hmm. But there are pieces that I can't possibly do because of the cost. And maybe I will be the bad person here for all the publishers, and maybe there will be my name on their booth that do not come by this booth. No. But you know, I've tried to program a few rental pieces from a publisher this year, and starting with 3 works, and then now I'm down to 0 from that publisher. I won't say the name, but also because I was charged with a proposal score as well as rental. So it's very difficult with a small budget orchestra to do new composers, living composers' works. So, you know, this is a comment and wishes from a conductor's viewpoint.
I guess that's me.
I believe that's you.
Yeah. So let me just respond to you that certainly I can't speak for all my colleagues, but perusal scores are certainly not. It's not a charge for that. Those are certainly available.
I was charged about $75 with the shipping cost.
Oh, for a shipping cost, was it an imported score?
No.
It was
shipping
a domestic
cost was $35, and the $35 of perusal score to just to look at it.
Yeah, I understand. Well, what I would say to you is that you have a conversation with the publisher if you can, if you know, especially if you know someone in.
I've already
you've done that.
Talked to the publisher directly over the phone, and I sent an email, and the response was same.
Okay.
Several times that no, there's no flexibility, and this is the price. We cannot help you. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, it's obviously not going to be constructive for you to be not programming new works because of a shipping cost, attached to a perusal score. So that is, definitely,
$75 is not that much, and
yeah.
The overall total cost was that was, but with the rental cost,
right.
over $700 for 30-minute work plus perusal score and all that stuff is added. It comes out $800 or more, and it is very costly.
Sure, I understand that. No, I do. And I think that my colleagues would agree with me, and you should feel free to speak with us afterwards about this. I certainly would have a conversation with you about the issue of cost, since you're facing that so important, and we would work with you to try to make it happen. And I think my colleagues would do the same. I think the important thing is to have, I think, a relationship, establish that, what we're talking about is partnerships. If it's a living composer, the publisher can talk to the composer. Can talk to, here's Steve Stucky, just talk to him about, okay, this orchestra really is interested. They would partner. They would help, I think, make that happen for you. I'd be surprised if my colleagues didn't, say the exact same thing to you. So that's all I would say is just don't let it stop there. Take it forward. Talk with someone, who you're meeting here at the booths or in the room, and let them know. Obviously, you're committed and passionate about adding these works to your repertoire. We want that. We don't want to block that. So I don't know if any of my other colleagues would like to comment on that, but that's how I feel.
Could I just add something? First, thank you for playing a piece twice.
Yes.
No one ever plays a piece twice, except occasionally in L.A., but I mean, it's very rare. It reminded me of a story that's not a living composer, but when Esapeka first came to the L.A. Phil, it was before you, Chad. He programmed everyone's favorite toe tapper, the Schoenberg Variations for Orchestra, 3 times in 4 years. He was laying down a marker, for one thing, and some people ran away. But at the end of those 3 weeks with that piece, the audience knew the piece and the orchestra knew the piece. They could actually play it. I was really very impressed by that model, and I think we should. We're so much in the thrall of premiere syndrome that the first performance is always much easier to get than the second.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that, which is I think obviously the LA Philharmonic, we're in a very unique position. We're very lucky. We have the resources to commission a lot of works, and we have the resources to kind of put these programs together. But I also think, I look across the country and I look at what other works that my colleague orchestras are doing and that they have commissioned that I've perhaps not been a part of. And we have a responsibility to kind of promote those pieces as well. On a more kind of philosophically, I also believe that we have a responsibility to kind of step back sometimes from this issue of exclusivity, which I think is just an absolutely kind of outmoded idea in the publishing and in the presentation world, which is that the idea that the idea that any new work is going to be cannibalized within your community by having been performed somewhere else, I think is absolutely kind of ludicrous. And I think that there's enough to say about doing new works, whether or not it is a world premiere or whether it is a local premiere or whether it is the Pasadena Symphony did a piece and the LA Philharmonic does it the year after. If it's a good piece, it deserves to be heard, and we as artistic institutions have our own unique audiences. That's what we bring to the table: unique audiences. Now we certainly have relationships with composers that are unique to us as well, but it's not always about dedicating a certain amount of money to kind of get that world premiere. And I completely agree with you. We have to do a better job, even at the big orchestras, of bringing pieces back. And Esapeka is absolutely right. There's no reason why we can't play, the Tom Addis Violin Concerto every other year. And it kind of helps us in the same way that we think about Beethoven 7, we have to think about those great pieces of contemporary music. Somehow we say, our audiences can take Rimsky-Korsakov, Scheherazade every year, and we can do it at the Bowl, and we can do all of that. We have to think the same way about great pieces that we commission, and I think that's a leap, but it's one that I think our audiences are ready to make. The audiences are, in my experience, at least in Los Angeles, audiences are comfortable hearing new works if you tell them why it's important for them to hear it. And you can figure out, as an audience member, you can smell when a piece is just being sandwiched in there, it's being put on there for all the wrong reasons. But when there's conviction in what you're doing, I think audiences see it, right? This old idea that contemporary art and contemporary music are different. Well, well, duh, yes, but the approach that we as contemporary citizens take with new music and new art and new food and new everything is the same. You might like a movie, you might not like a movie. You might like a new piece of art, you might not. But we can't have a different set of rules that apply to new music than apply to the other arts.
Right. Thank you. Anyone else? Questions? Yes, absolutely, Steve.
We really do need more questions, but while you're walking to the microphone, I want to tell a story about a civic orchestra, because you come from a civic orchestra. I was at a civic orchestra concert recently where they did something I thought very brilliant. It's an unpaid orchestra. It's an orchestra with probably a smaller budget than $53,000. And they ran a competition for a high school poet and a young adult professional poet in that town. And somebody judged this competition, and they chose one poem from high school and one from somebody in their 20s or early 30s. And then they commissioned 2 local college composers to set these poems. But you see, the hook has already been set, because the whole high school showed up, and all the poetry fans in town showed up, and then everybody from the college showed up, and all the parents showed up, and it was like a festival, of pride in these local artists. Mm-hmm. And it must have cost them essentially nothing.
We had a similar situation like that in New York with composer Gilda Lyons, who was commissioned to write songs setting poems by junior high school, inner city school students, and these were just huge runaway hits at concert after concert after concert. It was and now actually we're going to be publishing these songs, but I mean it's just exactly goes back to what you're saying. You've got the hook, you've got an anchor, use that, and there are many other ways to really engage a composer creatively, and they're pretty limitless, I would say. It's just based on how you can imagine or think of using a composer to connect with whether it's students or your audiences. So, do we have more questions, more comments about what's working in your orchestras, or what's?
Hi, I'm Chris Ross. I know most of you on the panel, but for everyone, I conduct a youth orchestra and a college orchestra in Southern California. And one thing that has worked for me is to have the blessing of the LA Phil and the Pacific Symphony and the Philharmonic Society to work with and be very open with what I do. And I like doing a lot of new music. And, for instance, the LA Phil has been very open in letting me borrow composers. That, for instance, Brett Dean, the Australian composer, was in town. I programmed a piece of his. They let me borrow him for an afternoon. And Steve has come down several times as well to come and visit. And these are people that I could not afford to bring on my own. And it gives us a chance to play a work by one of the great living composers, and also have them come down and work with our students. They get to hear another one of their pieces performed, and it seems like they tend to have a good time when they come down. So for me, it's I've been very grateful to have these opportunities. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a perfect example of the synergy that goes on within a community, within kind of partnering with other arts institutions. I mean, something that works is to kind of is to saturate your community with the works of a composer, whether it's Brett Dean or Tom Addis or Steve Stucky. I also have been thinking recently, are there ways that the bigger arts institutions can be more supportive of the smaller budgeted arts institutions within our communities by commissioning works that perhaps the LA Philharmonic will play, and perhaps then the youth orchestras or some of the could play the next week, so that they can have a chance to kind of be rehearsing it simultaneously to a professional orchestra. Their musicians can come and hear the orchestra play it. It can give an opportunity for a composer. In our experience, composers are always interested in going out and working with people outside of the main symphony orchestra. They're are all sorts of kind of creative ways that we can get these pieces into our communities across all the levels. I think that's something that's going to be, for me, in my kind of hearing some of these panels over the course of the last 3 days, it's about this vertical integration within our communities and within our organizations. How do we integrate our ideas, not just at the top and not just to kind of, but really get buy-in from across the organization and across the community. And we have to be thinking about those things. We have to be doing those things to sustain ourselves, to be sustaining our audience, and also making what we do relevant.
Thanks, Chad. Ed, actually, I wanted to bring you back in and talk a little bit about, if you would, just address the first question I mentioned, which was looking back at existing models of residencies going back to the 80s and comparing and contrasting them now with what other models are available, especially via Meet the Composer. Maybe tell us a little bit more about Earshot and Music Alive and also Ford Made in America. So.
Okay, well, there are about 6 questions embedded in
right.
there, but just briefly, the difference between the residencies that were, that sort of defined a sort of new era in composer-orchestra relations in the 80s, which Meet the Composer supported long before my time, so I can talk about them without too much ego. That they were designed to be long-term major composers literally in residence. I mean, it kind of permanently part of the families of these mostly fairly major orchestras over the course of several years. That model worked fabulously in the conditions of the 80s when there was huge amount of money. 2 sponsors called up John Duffy within a week of each other saying, can we give you several $1 million to do this idea? People don't do that for me very often. I mean, it happens every other week now instead of every week. That was a joke. But now again, one has to change with the times. Our current program called Music Alive is principally supported by one funder, by the Mellon Foundation, and it gives us the ability to, as I say, sponsor a whole range of different kinds of quote-unquote residencies. And in the kind of at the sort of entry level residency is a minimum of 3 weeks where the composer has something to do with the composer, performance of their work, sometimes just one work, and the composer does the usual stuff for 1 week, i.e. shows up, goes to rehearsals, maybe does an open rehearsal, does a pre-concert talk. But the idea is to get beyond that. I think that the good news is that over the last 20, 30 years, it's become sort of, it's kind of de rigueur that of course, if the composers you're doing, especially if you're doing a premiere, the composer's going to be there, going to do these kind of basic things. But we like Music Alive to in some way push the envelope, move the dial of the way that composers relate with orchestras, and in every situation, that it's a different thing. Again, it depends on what the orchestra needs. Hopefully, the orchestra has a sense of what their goals are. We've had the Pacific Symphony did a really great thing with a young composer competition. Michael Doherty was in residence, and they did a competition with young composers who came in, and actually they allowed the audience to vote on which composer should get a commission, which, guess what? In the general culture, that's not edgy, but in our world, that's edgy. And we need more edginess, and actually we need more. I loved the session I was in yesterday. So we need a culture of failure in this business, and of course that sounds completely absurd. But actually, one of the things that I would like to think that Music Alive allows people to do is to try something new, try a model that's a little different. And if it fails, well, so be it. But nothing happens without that effort. Now, moving on to let's just do one other of your 6 questions. Norman mentioned Earshot, which is actually, I don't know if Michael Geller is here from the ACO, from the American Composers Orchestra, actually is a brainchild of the American Composers Orchestra, but Meet the Composer and several other organizations, American Music Center, American Composers Forum, sort of are in a kind of interesting partnership to make this thing kind of help it happen. The basic concept is that ACO has done for many, many years a reading of young composers' work that has, the orchestra reads the pieces twice, does rehearsal, talks to the composer, the performers do, they're mentor composers, and then they do the piece again in a kind of a quasi-performance setting the next day. And the idea of Earshot is actually maybe to kind of bottle that and move it around the country. And I think the really sneaky, smart thing about it is its idea is to be built on extra services that orchestras may have that they actually have, the contract allows their musicians to do a couple more services and they don't actually have programming for that. And in many cases, that's worked really well. And the idea of Earshot is that this becomes kind of a general thing, that lots of orchestras realize that, oh, hey, wow, we can actually do a reading, it's fun, it's easy, you get some relationships with new composers, some of them may be good, some of them may not be. Again, that's part of the risk factor. But Earshot's a really interesting thing, and if you don't know about it, go to the ACO's website and have a look. It's really interesting.
Any questions, comments? Folks have any contributions? Quiet group, okay. I wanted to just maybe, Joanna, go back to you about your conversation, your discussion about Gabby, working with Gabriella Frank, and how, as a music director, you find, what is the excitement for you? What is the value in a composer's perspective, not only on just bringing, writing a new work for your orchestra, but actually contributing to programming?
Sure, thank you. And going back to your question, I was thinking, it's not directly related to what you said, but one of the things when I became a music director that I did, I met and I talked to several publishers, including yourself. And one of the things that I do with Gabriella, my creative advisor, is that we listen to a lot of music together. We look at a lot of scores, and I'm constantly in touch with a lot of the publishers. Because as a conductor, I feel very isolated. I conduct my own concerts. I try to go to a lot of concerts, but in terms of new music, we're sort of isolated unless the publishers give us the information about what's going on. And the first two commissions that we're doing next season come from those kinds of relationships, because one of the publishers started talking to me about two emerging composers, and we're commissioning them, and I fell in love with their music. And otherwise, I would probably know their music but not commission in such a short amount of time. So I feel that relationships with publishers are very important at an early stage of our careers, because we just don't know, and we haven't formed our identity. I haven't. I don't know what will happen in 10 years in Berkeley. But so that I have valued, aside from all that ordeal that you're going through, that I hope gets resolved. But just from the artistic point of view, this is very important. So we get scores sent and CDs sent, and one of the things that we do together, Gabriella and I, is just that we listen to a lot of music together. And it's wonderful to have someone, a partner, an artistic partner that I really trust, and we just go without limits. We have no, we really don't care about what the other thinks, and we just say we like, we don't like. And we program sometimes composers that we listen based on that. And one of the biggest successes this year was a score that Norman gave me 2 years ago that I would never know unless you had given me that. So I think this is a very important point for us conductors, young conductors especially, who feel isolated sometimes in terms of new music. What do we value when the question was about commissioning? The perspective of a composer, and Gabriella has brought a lot to us. And Chad, you were talking about how Steve started this program in Los Angeles with the high school composers, and this I found very important, this relationship of composers and young composers, older composers and younger composers. Doing a lot of workshops with young composers, new music in general, I found early on that for the composers themselves, it was wonderful to have the perspective of the orchestra, to have the perspective of the conductor, but it would be wonderful to have the perspective of a peer. And Gabriella gave us that. So she's involved with under construction with our young composers, and they have the perspective of a peer constantly, every time. And the residencies that the composers have done this year, such as Steve, they all have spoken to our young composers. They brought their scores, and they had wonderful. John Adams came to the first one. Steve was on the second one. Paul Drescher was on the third one, and Gabriella was in all of them. So for them to have that opportunity to have feedback from these wonderful composers has been a wonderful experience, and I think a different one than having just the orchestra, the audience, and the conductor. I think it has been a very constructive experience. And just so Gabriella has been wonderful. This creative advisor role has been just wonderful, such generosity artistically from her. And also, from the commissioning point of view, just personally, I think that it's really our obligation to do it. And it's an obligation for ourselves. The history of music is filled with examples of how art has helped us live and experience life and understand what's going on, our recent history, our older history. And I just feel it's an obligation as institutions, if we can commission totally or partially, as Chad was saying. Berkeley Symphony cannot do 100 commissions a year, but we do co-commission. But just making it a point and an obligation in this sense for ourselves, so that we participate in creation in general and help understanding what's going on. I think it's really why I'm so passionate about doing new music and doing new works. And Gabriella is a wonderful person also to identify those composers and why, as Chad was saying, not how, but why we are doing what we are doing, and why we are playing the music we are doing, and why we are commissioning the composers we like.
Thank you, Joanna. We are down to the last minutes here, so I just wanted to, if anyone, have some last burning questions or comments for this. Yes, Becky.
Hi, that works, doesn't it? Yeah. I'm Becky Dawson from Oxford University Press, in Oxford, not the US. And I just want to sort of slightly stick my neck out and ask a bit of a provocative question. I feel in the UK we've got a real problem with those composers who are cool or especially articulate or good-looking being brought to the fore. And actually, they're not always the best writers of music, but they're getting featured more because they push themselves well and they fit a nice model. And I just wondered whether there's a sort of proactive strategy in the US with American orchestras to ensure that other people who might be a little bit shy or not supermodels to sort of come through, because I think it's a real problem in the UK actually, and I hope everybody agrees. But
that's great. Thank you, Becky. Steve, Chad.
I wasn't aware of having this problem in this country, but
you're so handsome.
I thought it was a very nice event when the Chicago Symphony appointed their two young composer fellows. One of them is a very outgoing, very well-known young man, Mason Bates, and the other one is the shyest person I've ever met, Anna Klein. But she seems genuine, so she has not been promoted on the basis of her personality.
that's really good to know.
I will take an equally provocative stance and say that I think having composers who actually can speak articulately and explain what they do and how they do it is value added. It's one of the new music is the great equalizer in taste, right? That you don't have 250 years or 200 years of churning and kind of fleshing out to kind of get to this canon which is determined as great, right? We're presenting a new piece, and you as an audience member have to make you have to have an opinion. right? And your opinion is as valid as the musician on stage, right? We're all hearing it for the first time, and that's something that I love about new music. Now, if a composer then can, in a pre-concert talk or during the stage or whatever, also say, here's what I'm thinking, I think that's a wonderful thing. There will be composers like Tom Addis who say, I don't want to talk about my music. My music is my music. It speaks for itself. And I understand that point of view as well. So I can see both sides. I don't see the beauty contest part of the composer, but
After this, I'm going to teach at the Aspen Music Festival in school, the master class for the next month. And we spend a good deal of time teaching those kids every summer how to bow, but also how to act in rehearsal and how to speak to the public. It's part of the job. Tom can get away with it, but almost no one else.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, in the back.
Hi, I'm Liza Grossman. I'm the music director of the Contemporary Youth Orchestra in Cleveland. And one of the things that I found over the last 15 years of our existence is the support that you get from local musicians when you do like a call for scores and bring composers in who are already involved in the area's development of new music. And the other thing that's really positive about, I mean, we've done 80 world premieres in the last 15 years, but we've also done, we've probably repeated 20 of those. And what we've found is that the audiences who have been following us for some time, we end up getting feedback from them about what pieces they really enjoy and what pieces they would like to hear again and why. And then doing those again ends up bringing in more audiences. And I've also found that if you just can contact the composer and talk with them and tell them that you really, really love their music and would like to bring them in and to work with 120 amazing children who are not only our orchestras of the future, but our audiences of the future and our supporters, that they're more than willing to come in and be supportive of this endeavor. So that's really worked very, very well for us, whether we have the finances to fully support a top shelf commission or not. Talking with the composers is the best strategy, and also getting feedback from your audiences and frankly from your orchestra members, because the kids in CYO have been really some of the best feedback for us.
Your orchestra, I remember when we first spoke, whatever, I was in Cleveland and for a premiere, and we just chatted on the phone. It was astonishing because your organization, correct me if I'm wrong, but the orchestra is playing all contemporary music. I mean,
yes, only.
Only. So this is all you're doing, and you're doing it with a youth orchestra.
Yes.
I think it's just fabulous, and it's just a great model.
Thank you. And the children are the ones that now get excited about when the Cleveland Orchestra does a new work. And are the ones who also say, why did they embed that with Beethoven 7? I want to hear everything that's new. You know, so it's good. It's a positive thing. The kids are really involved in this now.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, I think we're pretty much over time. Yes? Okay. Yes, we've got to go. So thank you all for coming, and have a good trip home.